Hello, this is Dark Whispers of Korea. Today's story is The Bridge of Whispers, a tale inspired by the Inju Seolhwa legend. Let's listen together. Gangdong District, Seoul, 2:47 a.m. Lee Dae-ho had been pouring concrete for 30 years. He'd built half the bridges in Seoul, working nights when the heat wouldn't crack the fresh pour. But he'd never felt anything like the cold that rose from the Han River on this October night.
Just finish this section and we can call it. 20 more minutes.
His assistant, a young man named Kim Tae-sung, stood at the water's edge checking the foundation anchors. The river was black glass, perfectly still despite the autumn wind that rustled through the construction site.
Dae-ho Hyung, come look at this. The rebar. It's warm.
Dae-ho climbed down from the mixer platform, his work boots crunching on gravel. The steel reinforcement rods that had been driven into the riverbed yesterday were supposed to be cold. Steel was always cold at night. But when Dae-ho touched the rebar, he jerked his hand back. The metal was fever hot, and it seemed to pulse under his palm like something living.
That's not possible. Steel doesn't...
Tae-sung's flashlight beam caught movement in the river. Something pale rising from the depths. Not breaking the surface, but visible through the dark water. A face, no, multiple faces, pressing up against the water's surface from below like hands against glass.
Oh, God. Oh, my God. Do you see?
The river erupted, not with violence, but with a terrible, deliberate motion. The water rose in a column impossibly tall, and inside it stood a young woman. Her hanbok was white, her hair black as the river itself, and her eyes wept continuous streams of water that ran down her pale cheeks.
Why do you build here?
Tae-sung ran. His flashlight clattered to the ground, its beam spinning across the construction site as he sprinted for his truck. Dae-ho tried to follow, but his legs wouldn't move. The woman in the water was looking at him, and her gaze froze him in place.
Please, we're just doing our jobs. We don't mean...
300 years I have waited. No. More bridges?
The rebar behind Dae-ho began to bend, not breaking, but twisting like clay in invisible hands. The steel screamed as it deformed, wrapping around itself in impossible spirals. Dae-ho watched in horror as the metal formed a cage, roughly the size and shape of a human body. The woman stepped closer, walking on the water's surface. Each footstep sent ripples across the Han, and where the ripples touched the construction site, concrete began to crack and crumble.
Join the others beneath the water.
No, please.
Dae-ho's screams echoed across the river. By the time Tae-sung's truck reached the main road, by the time he found the courage to call the police, Lee Dae-ho was gone. Only his hard hat remained, floating in the black water beside the twisted steel cage. And deep beneath the Han River, where sunlight never reached, a young woman who had died 300 years ago wept tears of salt water and waited for someone to finally understand. 3 weeks later, Minjun Park stood at the edge of the Han River, staring at the twisted rebar that jutted from the failed foundation like the ribs of some prehistoric creature. This was supposed to be simple, a pedestrian bridge, 300 meters, connecting Amsadong's traditional neighborhood with the modern riverside park. His father had built bridges all over Seoul, but his father had never lost a worker to whatever this was.
The police ruled it accidental drowning, said Daeho must have slipped and fell in, but Tae-sung swears he saw something in the water.
Tae-sung was in shock. Trauma does strange things to perception.
Young Hee, his assistant and partner, gave him a look that said she didn't believe that any more than he did. 3 foundation failures in 6 months, 1 dead worker, and now half the construction crew had quit, refusing to come back no matter how much overtime he offered.
Minjun, maybe we should consider relocating the bridge, find another crossing point.
The city contract is specific. This location, the traffic studies, the community access, everything points to this exact spot.
A gust of wind made the twisted rebar sing, a low, mournful note that raised goosebumps on Min Jun's arms, despite the warm October sun. Young Hee wrapped her blazer tighter around herself.
It's cold here. Even in daylight, it's cold.
They both turned at the sound. An elderly woman approached, her traditional purple hanbok vivid against the construction site's industrial gray. She walked with a carved wooden cane, each tap deliberate and measured.
Still trying to force your bridge across the water, young man.
Mrs. Haewo, I didn't expect to see you here.
Grandmother Haewo was a neighborhood fixture, living in the last traditional Hanok house that hadn't been demolished for apartments. Her family had owned land here for 8 generations. She looked at the twisted steel with an expression that might have been pity or might have been grim satisfaction.
300 years ago, my great-great-grandfather tried to build a bridge here. The river took the workers too. 7 men disappeared into the water before they stopped trying.
With respect, Mrs. Haewo, that's just folklore. We're using modern engineering, geological surveys.
Child, do you know what Inju means? Human pillars. In the old days, when a bridge or building refused to stand, they would bury someone alive in the foundation. The sacrifice would anchor the structure in both the physical world and the spirit world.
The Han River seemed to respond to her words, its surface rippling despite the still air. Minjun felt his engineer's mind reject the idea, even as something deeper, more primal, recognized the truth in the old woman's voice.
That's barbaric and illegal.
It was both those things 300 years ago too. But they did it anyway. A young woman named Choi Mi-young, 16 years old. They wrapped her in silk, gave her wine mixed with opium, and buried her alive in the foundation of the old bridge.
Mrs. Haewo's eyes were distant, seeing something beyond the present moment.
The bridge stood for 3 centuries, until the Japanese occupation when they tore it down to build a railroad. But me young, she's still here, still waiting in the water, and she remembers what was done to her.
A piece of the failed foundation broke away and splashed into the river. Minjun watched ripples spread across the surface, and for just a moment he could swear he saw a pale hand reaching up from the depths before the water went still again.
Even if that story is true, what are we supposed to do? We can't just abandon the project.
No, but you can build here either. Not without understanding what you're building over.
She turned to leave, her wooden cane clicking against the pavement, but she paused, looking back over her shoulder.
My niece is a mudang, a shaman. She lives in Naksandong. If you want answers, visit her. But go before sunset. The spirits are stronger in darkness.
That afternoon, Minjun sat in his cramped office in Gangnam, surrounded by blueprints and engineering reports that suddenly felt inadequate. Young Hee had gone home early, claiming a migraine, but Minjun knew she was rattled. They both were. He pulled up historical records on his computer. The Joseon-era archives were fragmentary, but he found references to a bridge in Amsadong. Construction begun 1723, completed 1724 after. The text was damaged here, water-stained and illegible. But the bridge had stood until 1910, when Japanese colonial forces demolished it.
300 years, just like she said.
A text from Young Hee. Did you see the news? Another construction accident. Mapo Bridge. Worker fell into the river. They're saying accidental, but... Minjun's hands were shaking as he typed the address Mrs. Haewo had given him into his phone. Naksandong was across the city, a neighborhood of narrow alleys and traditional houses clinging to the slopes of Naksan Mountain. He shouldn't go. This was insane. Ghosts weren't real. Curses weren't real. But as he stood to leave, his office window reflected the setting sun over the Han River, and he could have sworn he saw a woman's face in the glass, pale and weeping, before it vanished. Rain began falling as Minjun drove through Seoul's evening traffic, the sky opening up with sudden autumn violence. The GPS led him through streets that grew narrower and steeper until he was crawling up alleyways barely wide enough for his Hyundai. Traditional Hanok houses pressed close on either side, their curved tile roofs dark and glistening with rain. The address belonged to a house that seemed older than the city itself. Paper lanterns hung under the eaves, their warm light defying the storm. Before Minjun could knock, the door opened. The woman who answered was younger than he expected, perhaps 40, dressed in white hanbok that seemed to glow in the dim light. Her eyes were intense, focused, as if she could see through him to something beyond.
You're the bridge builder. My aunt said you would come.
Mrs. Haewo sent me. I need to understand what's happening at my construction site.
Come inside, but remove your shoes. The spirits are particular about cleanliness.
The interior was a shrine. Candles flickered on every surface, casting dancing shadows across walls covered in ritual masks and silk paintings of gods and demons. Incense smoke hung thick in the air, sweet and cloying. In the center of the main room stood an altar draped in silk, covered with offerings, rice cakes, dried fish, bowls of makioli rice wine.
Sit. I'll prepare for the gut.
What?
The ritual, to speak with what lies beneath your bridge.
Sun Young moved around the room with practiced efficiency, lighting more candles, arranging ritual implements. She took up a pair of jangu drums, the traditional hourglass-shaped instruments used in shaman ceremonies. When she looked at Minjun again, her expression had changed, distant, focused inward.
What I'm about to do is dangerous. The spirit under your bridge is old and angry. If she chooses to speak through me, you must not touch me, no matter what you see or hear. Do you understand?
Yes, I understand.
The drumbeat started low, a heartbeat rhythm that seemed to sync with Minjun's own pulse. Sun Young began to dance, her movements fluid and strange, her white hanbok swirling around her like water. She chanted in a language Minjun didn't recognize, Old Korean perhaps, or something older still. The candles flickered despite the still air. The temperature dropped so suddenly that Minjun's breath became visible, and soon Young's eyes rolled back, showing only whites.
Who calls me from the deep places?
The voice that came from Sun Young's mouth was not her own. It was younger, fractured, each word separated by vast spaces, as if the speaker had forgotten how to speak human language.
My name is Minjun Park. I'm trying to build a bridge. I need to know why it keeps failing.
Sun Young's body jerked, her head snapping toward him with inhuman precision. When her lips moved, water trickled from the corners of her mouth.
Your bridge will never stand. I am the foundation. I am what was promised.
Choi Mi-young.
The name seemed to strike the spirit like a physical blow. Sun Young staggered, her hands clawing at her throat as if drowning. Water poured from her mouth now, more than should be possible, pooling on the wooden floor.
They wrapped me in silk, gave me wine, told me I would be honored, told me my sacrifice would be remembered.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what happened to you.
The spirit's rage filled the room like a living thing. Candles exploded in showers of wax. The ritual masks on the walls turned to face Minjun, their painted eyes following his movement.
Sorry. 300 years I have waited in the cold and the dark while my name, forgotten a while, though bridge, I died, for was torn down like it meant nothing.
Sun Young rose into the air, her feet lifting off the ground, her body rigid as if held by invisible hands. More water poured from her mouth, from her eyes, forming a pool beneath her suspended form.
What do you want? How can I make this right?
Another must take my place, or no bridge will ever stand. 7 men died trying. Now 1 has joined Me, 6 more will follow until someone stays forever.
The spirit released its hold. Sun Young collapsed to the wet floor, coughing and gasping. The supernatural cold receded like a wave pulling back. Min Jun rushed to help her, his hands finding her pulse, fast but steady.
Are you okay? Sun Youngus,
She's so angry, so lonely. 3 centuries alone in the water, waiting for someone to remember her name.
Sun Young sat up slowly, wringing water from her hair even though it had been dry minutes before. Her hands were shaking.
She'll kill them all, Min Junasi. Everyone who tries to build that bridge. Unless someone volunteers to take her place in Sadeep. Or unless...
Unless what?
Unless you find another way to honor her sacrifice. To make her matter again.
That night, Min Jun couldn't sleep. He lay in his apartment staring at the ceiling, watching car lights sweep across the plaster and thinking about a girl who died 300 years ago. His phone buzzed constantly, texts from Young Hee about contractor withdrawals, from city officials about project delays, from his father asking why the simple bridge was taking so long. But Min Jun couldn't stop thinking about Mi Young's words. My sacrifice would be remembered. What if that was the key? Not replacement, but remembrance. He started researching memorial bridges, structures that honored the dead while serving the living. The Pont de l'Alma in Paris, the Brooklyn Bridge with its workers' memorial, the Millau Viaduct with its dedication to those who died in construction. What if they could build a bridge that was also a monument? What if Mi Young's name could be carved in stone? Her story told to everyone who crossed the water. The next morning, Min Jun arrived at the construction site before dawn. The twisted rebar looked different in the pre-sunrise darkness. Less like wreckage, more like a sculpture. A monument to failed attempts and forgotten sacrifices.
You look like you haven't slept.
I have an idea. It's going to sound insane, but I need you to hear me out.
He explained everything. The shaman ritual, the spirit's demands, his research on memorial structures. Young Hee listened without interruption, her pragmatic engineer's face cycling through disbelief, doubt, and finally something that might have been hope.
You want to turn our bridge into a shrine.
Not a shrine, a memorial. We honor Mi Young's sacrifice, we tell her story, and we build a crossing that remembers the human cost of infrastructure.
The city will never approve it. The investors will think we've lost our minds.
Then we'll have to convince them.
The Han River surface broke with ripples despite the still morning air. Both of them turned toward the water, and there, standing on the surface as if it were solid ground, was Mi Young. She was beautiful and terrible, her white hanbok flowing in underwater currents that shouldn't exist in air. Her face was young, frozen at 16 forever, but her eyes held centuries of grief, and she was weeping, continuous streams of water running down her pale cheeks.
Oh my God, Min-jun, do you see?
I see her.
Mi-young drifted closer, her feet never quite touching the ground. When she spoke, her voice echoed as if coming from the bottom of a well.
Shall has posibles seid im Vatensee, so kann ich korb ostomor als nidin didn't, wa alni osit dinveri nemudang.
Yes. Choi Mi-young, 16 years old, sacrificed for a bridge in 1724.
The spirit tilted her head, water cascading from her hair.
No one has said my name in so long.
I want to change that. I want to build a bridge that tells your story, that makes sure everyone remembers what happened to you.
Lies. You want to build your bridge. You want money, glory, just like they did.
The river began to rise, water climbing up the concrete foundations in defiance of gravity. Young-hee grabbed Min-jun's arm, pulling him back, but he stood firm.
Then test me. Watch what I do. If I'm lying, if I'm using your story just to build my bridge, then stop me. Destroy the construction. But if I honor your sacrifice, if I make sure you're never forgotten again, then let the bridge stand.
Mi-young's weeping intensified, the water streaming from her eyes faster, falling to the ground with sounds like rain.
You cannot know what it is like to be alone in the dark forever.
You're right, I can't. But I can make sure you're not forgotten. I can give you what they promised, that your sacrifice would matter.
The spirit stared at him for what felt like hours. Then slowly she nodded. Her form began to fade, dissolving into mist that blew across the water surface.
Build your bridge. But remember me, or I will drag it and you beneath the waves.
She was gone. Young-hee collapsed to her knees, hyperventilating. Min-jun's own hands were shaking, but his mind was already racing through designs, calculations, ways to integrate a memorial into the bridge structure.
That really happened. She's real. Ghosts are real.
Yes, and we're going to build her a bridge.
The next 3 months were a blur of redesigns, city council meetings, and negotiations with increasingly skeptical investors. Min-jun's proposal was unprecedented, a pedestrian bridge that doubled as a memorial, with Mi-young's story carved in Korean, English, and Chinese along the walkway. Stone pillars would mark each end, bearing her name and the names of the 7 men who'd died trying to build the original bridge.
Which is exactly why we should do this. How many people were sacrificed for Korea's infrastructure? How many names were forgotten? This is a chance to acknowledge that history.
We've implemented new safety protocols. Geological surveys show stable bedrock. The foundation redesign addresses all structural concerns.
What Young-hee didn't say, what Min-jun didn't say, was that since the morning Mi-young had appeared to them, the construction site had been quiet. No more twisted rebar. No more accidents. As if the spirit was waiting to see if they would keep their promise.
There won't be, I promise.
Construction began again in December. Winter winds off the Han, cutting through even the thickest work clothes. But the foundation held this time. The steel stayed straight. The concrete cured without cracking. Workers who'd refused to return found themselves drawn back, unable to explain why they suddenly felt the project was safe. Min-jun worked alongside the crews, supervising every detail of both bridge and memorial. The stone carvers came from Gyeongju, specialists in traditional techniques. They spent weeks on Mi-young's memorial pillar, chiseling her story with the reverence usually reserved for Buddhist temple work.
I can feel her, you know, watching us work, making sure we get it right.
Can you really?
I've been carving memorials for 30 years. The dead always watch when their stories are being told.
On February mornings, before the workers arrived, Min-jun would stand at the construction site and speak to the water. He'd tell Mi-young about the progress, about the memorial taking shape, about how her name would be remembered. He never saw her again, but sometimes the water would ripple in response, or a cold breeze would touch his face like approval. Mrs. Haewo visited weekly, her aged face bright with approval. She'd brought old documents from her family's archive, records of the original bridge, sketches of its design, even a faded painting that might have been Mi-young's portrait.
She was beautiful, wasn't she? They always chose beautiful girls, as if beauty made the sacrifice more valuable.
We're making sure people know she was more than beautiful. She was a person with a life and a future that was stolen from her.
The bridge took shape through winter and into spring. Its design was both modern and traditional, sleek steel and glass integrated with stone pillars carved with traditional patterns. Solar panels along the railings would light the memorial at night, ensuring Mi-young's story was visible even in darkness. Young-hee had initially been skeptical, but she threw herself into the project with fierce dedication. She designed an interactive element, QR codes linking to a website with historical documents, photographs, and oral histories about human pillar sacrifices across Korea.
If we're going to remember Mi-young, we should remember all of them. Every forgotten sacrifice that built this country.
The website grew to include hundreds of stories maintained by a volunteer historical society. Descendants of other victims reached out, sharing their family histories. What had started as one bridge became a national conversation about remembering the forgotten. In April, as cherry blossoms fell like snow across Seoul, Mrs. Haewo collapsed. Min-jun got the call from Sun Young while standing on the nearly completed bridge.
She doesn't have long. She asked for you.
He found the old woman in her traditional hanok, lying on a sleeping mat, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Despite her frailty, her eyes were bright when she saw him.
did you, finish it?
Almost. 2 more weeks. I wish you could see the opening ceremony.
I'll see it from wherever I go next.
She took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong.
Thank you for listening, for believing. Most young people would have dismissed an old woman's ghost stories.
They weren't stories, though, were they?
No, they were never stories.
She died that evening, peacefully, surrounded by family. Her funeral was traditional, 3 days of mourning in the Hanok's courtyard. Minjun attended, and so did most of the construction crew. They all felt they'd lost something important, a link to the past, a reminder that some knowledge can't be found in engineering textbooks. The night before the bridge's opening ceremony, Minjun stood alone at the construction site one final time. Everything was complete. The walkway gleamed under security lights. The memorial pillars stood proud, Mi-young's story carved deep into granite that would outlast them all.
I kept my promise. I remembered you. Everyone will remember you now.
The water before him began to glow, phosphorescent and beautiful, and rising from the depths, her form more solid than he'd ever seen it, was Mi-young. She was different now. The rage was gone from her eyes, replaced by something that might have been peace. She walked across the water toward him, her bare feet leaving ripples of light. When she stood before him, she was close enough to touch.
You kept your promise.
Her voice was clearer now, each word no longer separated by vast silences. She reached out one translucent hand and touched the memorial pillar bearing her name.
I am remembered.
You'll always be remembered, as long as this bridge stands.
Mi-young smiled, sad and beautiful, and finally at peace. She looked 16 again, not ancient, just a young woman who'd had her whole life stolen away.
Thank you. I can rest now.
She began to fade, but this time it was different. Not dissolving in anger, but releasing, letting go. The light around her grew brighter, warmer, until she was more light than form. And in that light, Minjun saw other shapes, 7 men in work clothes standing behind her. The original bridge builders, the ones who'd died trying to span the river. They were all smiling, all at peace, all finally free. The light faded, the water stilled, and Minjun was alone under the stars, standing on a bridge that would carry more than just pedestrians. It would carry memory forward, keep the past present, and honor sacrifices that should never have been necessary. The opening ceremony was attended by hundreds, city officials, news crews, historical society members, and neighborhood residents all gathered to walk the Choi Mi-young Memorial Bridge for the first time. The mayor gave a speech about modern engineering and historical consciousness. Descendants of the 7 original builders laid flowers at their ancestors' memorial pillars. But the moment that mattered most came when an elementary school class from Amsadong walked across the bridge with their teacher. They stopped at Mi-young's memorial, and the teacher read the inscription aloud, her name, her age, her story, and the promise carved in stone. Never forgotten, always honored.
Choi Mi-young, 16 years old, sacrificed 1724, remembered forever.
One small girl placed a hand on the memorial pillar, her fingers tracing the carved letters.
Did it hurt when they buried her?
Yes. It hurt very much. That's why we remember, so that nothing like this ever happens again.
Young Hee stood beside Min-jun, watching the ceremony with tears in her eyes.
We did it. We actually did it.
We did more than build a bridge. We brought her home.
That night, after the crowds dispersed and the news crews left, Min-jun walked the bridge alone one final time. The solar panels had activated, bathing the memorial in soft light, and there, in the water below, he saw his reflection. But beside it, for just a moment, another reflection. A young woman in white smiling up at him from the depths. Then she was gone, truly gone, released at last from 3 centuries of waiting. The Han River flowed on, black and ancient and holding its secrets. But one secret had finally been told. One forgotten sacrifice had been remembered. One restless spirit had found peace. The Choi Mi-young Memorial Bridge became a model for remembrance architecture across Korea. Other construction projects began incorporating memorials for the workers who died, for the sacrifices made, for the human cost of progress. What started as one bridge sparked a national movement to honor the forgotten. Min-jun's firm received dozens of requests to design similar structures. He accepted only those that truly honored the dead, that told their stories with respect and reverence. Because he'd learned something that no engineering school teaches, that the strongest foundations are built not just on steel and concrete, but on remembrance. Sun Young continued her work as a mudang, but now she also consulted on construction projects, helping builders understand when they were disturbing restless spirits and how to make peace with the past. She became known as the shaman who bridged worlds, traditional and modern, living and dead, forgotten and remembered. And on quiet evenings when the river mist rose from the Han and Seoul's lights reflected on the water like fallen stars, people walking the Choi Mi-young Memorial Bridge reported feeling a presence, not frightening but comforting, a sense of being watched over by someone who understood sacrifice, who valued remembrance, who finally rested in peace. Parents brought their children to read the memorial inscriptions. History students came to study the documentation. Old workers who'd built Seoul's infrastructure wept to see their forgotten colleagues honored at last. The bridge carried them all, not just across water, but across time, connecting present to past through the simple act of remembering. Min-jun never saw Mi-young again, but sometimes on the anniversary of the bridge's opening, flowers would appear on her memorial pillar with no indication of who'd left them. Fresh lotus blossoms, white and pure, that seemed to glow in the morning light. And in the depths of the Han River, where concrete and steel now stood firm and true, 7 stone pillars held steady, not built on human sacrifice but on something stronger, built on the promise that those who were lost would never be forgotten, that their names would be carved in stone and spoken by the living, that their sacrifices would finally matter. The bridge endures, the memory persists, and a girl named Choi Mi-young, who died at 16 for a bridge that stood for 3 centuries, has achieved something more permanent than any structure. She has become eternal in the act of being remembered. This is the gift the living can give to the dead. Not sacrifice, not replacement, but recognition, remembrance. The simple, powerful act of speaking their names and ensuring their stories survive. And in that remembrance, both the living and the dead find peace.